So this is going to be a really weird story time to make. The reason is because I've talked so much about church in many story times. I've done a total of 5 story times dedicated to either church or a church event, and I've referenced church in many other story times. I have done story times for 4 out of 5 total church events I've been to, with my current church of course, not including church events with other churches. But funnily enough, I have yet to do a story time on my first ever church event with my current church, being Winter Retreat 2018. In fact, prior to this story time, not once have I even mentioned this event in any story time. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about an event that I've yet to discuss. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 31 on August 13th, 2021. So in most story times regarding church, I generally have a pretty aggressive tone. This is mostly due to the conflict at church that still rages on today. I explained the situation in detail in Storytime 16 if you'd like to know more about it, but this storytime is going to be a lot different from other church story times, as this was 5 months before the conflict began, so it'll kind of break away from the usual church story time, as it's instead going to be a lot happier and just less depressing in general. There's also a lot of funny moments to talk about in the storytime too, so I hope y'all enjoy it. So first off, what is Winter Retreat? Well, Winter Retreat is a church trip that our church does for our youth generally during Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. This year, it took place January 13th to January 15th, 2018. This means that I would have been 13 years old in the 8th grade. Since this is the 8th grade and is between the months of September to March, I think you can guess what was happening during this time. I was depressed. I was bullied a lot in school, I was overfilled with schoolwork, and I was getting myself into drama online. As a result, I was a pretty irritable person. Depression would get very extreme later on, which I've discussed in many story times already. You can check out Storytime 28 if you'd like more information. I'm not going to talk about this because this is supposed to be a happy and funny story time, not a sad one. Anyways, this church trip is what I consider to be a light spot in this super dark time. It kind of revealed that, yeah, there was going to be some hope. I would not understand this sign until I was cured of depression though. So I've already done a story time on Winter Retreat 2019. At that event, it was only high schoolers. We also stayed in a huge cabin in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Pigeon Forge is up in the mountains, by the way, so that's why we chose this spot for a Winter Retreat. This year, things were a little different. So this was the original Winter Retreat, before our church made it high school only. It was available to all youth, instead of just high school, which is how I did this event in middle school. We also stayed in a hotel where we roomed with 3 others, although my case would be interesting, not in a bad way like Fuge was. It actually benefited me. Also, instead of doing worship and praise with our church, we would actually go to a concert where the company that runs Winter Retreat hosts a famous Christian musician or band. I'll explain when we get there. Then there would be a speaker who gave us a lesson. These I'll refer to as big-ass sessions like I refer to them in my D Now story times, since these were done with a ton of other churches from a ton of different places. As for everything else, we did as a church. This trip was in Gatlinburg. I've mentioned this place quite a lot throughout multiple story times, as me and my family enjoy going here on vacation, so I had somewhat of a sense of location on this trip. Gatlinburg is of course in the Great Smoky Mountains, which is in the eastern part of Tennessee. So before the trip, I was pretty excited, but I was also very nervous. This is my first church trip with my current church, so I was quite nervous about going. I did go to a church camp with a church I didn't even go to when I was a rising 6th grader, but that's a topic for another story time. However, despite being nervous, I was also excited to be with all my friends at church. Well, at the time friends, not anymore. I already discussed that in Storytime 16 and 29. Funnily enough, I actually don't remember spending much time with them on this trip anyways, so I'm not going to talk about them much throughout this story time. One disclaimer I want to mention is that because this was over 3.5 years ago, and I have never written about this trip, there is going to be a lot of information that I'm probably going to leave out. I'd love to include it if I could remember it. However, to help remember information, I went back to some of my earliest posts on Instagram, as I posted quite a lot of pictures on this trip, so that should help a little bit. So then how about we begin? So Saturday, January 13th, 2018, so I believe I didn't have to leave until later that morning. Pretty strange for a church trip. Normally for trips, our church is like, we ride at dawn, bitches! But I guess they just let us sleep in for this trip. So now, I remember on this ride up there, I sat beside a friend. They were my grade, I believe. And of course, since I've isolated myself for 2 years now, I don't even remember his or anyone's name, really. So that's all I remember about this trip. Well, not about the trip, about the ride. Another thing to note is that we took a big coach bus. This thing had portable chargers as well as other conveniences. It also had like a billion movie players. So our youth pastor played some movies throughout this trip up there. Now, Gatlinburg is about 4 hours away, so this is going to be a pretty long trip. So of course we took a stop. Like Winter Retreat 2019, we took a stop in Asheville, which would have been an hour 30 minutes into the trip. Asheville has a huge mall. Like, I remember that after we got done eating in the food court, we were allowed to walk around, and it was really easy to get lost in. Now, I remember the stop as being pretty memorable because of something pretty funny. So I, alongside everyone else at church, ordered Chick-fil-A. So I got my Chick-fil-A, the normal. Only problem, my cup had a hole in it. Yeah, to make matters even funnier, I didn't even notice until I was at my table. Only then I realized, oh shit, I have a hole in my cup, after noticing tea dripping right over my crotch. I think I was the only person who noticed this, so I took a picture of the cup. My pants dried up pretty quickly, so nobody could assume that I did something else in there. I got a new cup for free, but man, if people noticed this, that would have caused some issues. Then we finished up and headed back outside the mall, but then it started snowing, but we took off anyway. It was pretty cool though. I'm looking out the window while we're on I-40, not 45, and the ground is white. Not every day you're on the road while it's snowing, especially here in the South. And then about 2.5 hours later, we reached the hotel. So once we reached the hotel, a couple seniors got out and loaded all the suitcases. Then we parked the bus. Once the seniors got back, our youth pastor then announced who we're rooming with. So I think the system worked perfectly. Everyone's roommate was predetermined by our youth pastor before this trip. That means that he just told us who we were rooming with, and we do it. It was 4 people per room, by the way. We were allowed to request people who we wanted to room with. I didn't list anyone, though. So who was I rooming with? Well, I was assigned a room with one 7th grader and 2 fellow 8th graders. For some reason, each room connected to the other. There were like 2 sophomores and 2 juniors in the room that was connected to ours. One of the 8th graders in our room was really good friends with them, so we moved his stuff over there. Therefore, it was just 3 of us. Each room had 2 keys, so me and the other 8th grader shared the key while the 7th grader could borrow it if he needed to go somewhere. Overall, the rooming part of this trip was very well planned out. I have no idea why they decided to ditch this at Fuge that June. It just worked so perfectly and there weren't any hassle. Everyone had a room predetermined for them and nobody was left out, I don't think. There might have been, but I don't know. But I mean, they had to have done the math beforehand to create the rooms too. If only they did this at Fuge, that might have actually changed the course of action for the whole conflict and I might not even be in the situation I'm in right now. So the rooms were pretty simple. They had a TV, of course, on top of a dresser. There were 2 queen-sized beds. The other 8th grader took one bed, and me and the 7th grader took the other. There was also a bathroom, and I believe there was also a microwave and a refrigerator. Wish I had brought some Totino's pizza rolls with me, but I didn't think about that, so no late-night pizza rolls on this trip, unfortunately. Now, me and the other 8th grader and the 7th grader didn't really know each other very well. In fact, we never really talked throughout this trip either. I just did me and they didn't know him, so all good. The hotel itself wasn't too big. We were right next to the elevator, so we could easily go down. In fact, we were allowed to go down anywhere around the hotel at any time of the day. Like, if we wanted to go to the first floor and swim in the pool at 1 in the morning, we could. My roommates and I actually did that Sunday night. I'll talk about it when we get there. We just had to be careful, of course, since there could be pedophiles lurking around. We also had to be quiet, since there were some people other than us that were staying at the hotel. But other than that, we were basically free. Now, you might expect the whole noise scene to be as crazy as it was at Fuge. Surprisingly, nobody made much noise. I mean, sure, the 5-person room connected to ours was really crazy, but they were overall respectful to us and didn't make much noise. However, what I mean by crazy though is that they broke something literally the first 5 minutes of the trip. Yeah, apparently they were acting up or something and they ended up hitting a painting. The painting ended up falling and of course it broke. Me and my roommates then heard them all yell, "Oh shit!" at the top of their lungs and then they proceeded to laugh. Then they were running around thinking what they're gonna do. Me and my roommates went over there to check it out. The painting was completely destroyed. Well, not the painting itself, the frame was just completely shattered. The painting was fine though. Ultimately, they did the right thing and told our youth pastor about it. Not sure who paid for it, but wow. One thing I noticed from the church events I've been to is that at least one thing is going to break. It's just natural. When you put a group of group of teens in this type of environment, something is going to break. But this is the earliest in a church event that something's broken. It only took 5 minutes for this to happen. Oh well, it would be the only thing broken at this event. So at least we got that part over with. And of course, the best part was that I wasn't even with this group, so I didn't have anything to do with it. Only part I have in this is writing about it 3.5 years later, so it's all good. So then after that shenanigans, we went back into our bus and got food. So there were like 3 fast food places where we went to, and we basically got to choose where we wanted. I believe for the most part, I was with my friends, not my roommates. I don't even know where I ate, so I can't really describe what I ate or how my experience was. I probably did something stupid, but I don't know. And then comes the first big-ass session. So the music for this session was a live performance by Phil Wickham, who is a really famous Christian musician. So he performed. It was really cool seeing his concert. Like, I grew up listening to his music. I mean, I grew up in church. Of course I did. Every single Christian in the entire world has heard of Phil Wickham. But actually seeing him live was really special. But I didn't exactly remember too much from this performance. I believe I and the rest of the church were near the back, so we actually had to move up to view. Funnily enough, I remember at one point sitting on one of my friends' shoulders to see and take a picture. Really funny situation. And then we had the speaker give the lesson, and then we headed back to the hotel. So that performance was really cool. I very rarely go to live music concerts. Like, I've been to 2 Dave Matthews concerts, one in 2013 and the other in 2019. So at this point, I only had been to 1 concert that I barely remembered. So really cool. By the way, each big-ass session featured a notable Christian musician. It's not some random old... How about I redo that? Like, I kind of lost a bit of breath. By the way, each big-ass session featured a notable Christian music artist, not some random old guy from Nebraska or anything like that. So then that night at the hotel was something you only see on trips like these. Like, if you heard a story like this that didn't mention where I was, you would still be able to guess that this definitely took place on a church trip. So this situation started off with the fellow 8th grader turning on the TV and watching Star vs. the Force of Evil. I guess that show for him was like Metopia for me. I used it as stress relief and to sleep better. But at around 4 a.m., I woke up because the TV was still on. I guess Star must have used her magical powers and put the fellow 8th grader to sleep. A little pet peeve of mine is when people don't turn off the TV before they fall asleep. Is it really that hard? Like, every night when I'm done playing Metopia, I make sure to turn off the TV. It's not that hard. But this situation wasn't memorable because of that. It was because what was playing. I didn't wake up to Star vs. the Force of Evil. No, I woke up to 2 people having sex. More specifically, I woke up to a very loud moan. So I went over to the other bed and got the TV remote from his nightstand. I then turned off the TV. Afterwards, I went back to bed. I don't think the other boys heard me, but I'm glad I woke up from this though. Had none of us woken up from this moan, we were going to have a very difficult time explaining this to our youth pastor. I guess that moan wasn't too loud, as I seem to be the only person who heard it. I'm a light sleeper, so that explains why. Now, Star vs. the Force of Evil is of course a kid's cartoon. Me and my sister watched it occasionally when we were younger. I don't exactly remember what channel we watched it on though. Anyways, many kids channels seem to turn off kids stuff at a certain time and start playing adult shows. That's why I woke up to that rather than Star. So then of course brings me to Sunday, January 14th. So I believe we woke up at around 7:30. We then went down to the lobby, where the hotel was providing breakfast. I believe I ate with my roommates. The breakfast was just a normal hotel breakfast. Eggs, bacon, sausage, that stuff. After breakfast, at around 8:30, we went back to our rooms to get ready. Now the reason I want to mention this time of getting ready is because of something I brought with me that was extremely crucial on this trip. So, the average temperature that day was like 25 degrees. For reference, the average temperature here in Charlotte during the winter is about 58. So you bet that this is really cold. Fortunately, while packing before the trip, Dad let me borrow his thermal clothes. These are basically clothes that will keep you warm, and believe me, these things worked miracles on this trip. This day in particular, I basically put these thermal clothes under my main clothes since they weren't too big, but they still did the job. My dad's probably watching this story time, so thank you for letting me wear them. I might borrow them again sometime in the future. Who knows, I might bring them to college with me this January, although I'll probably just get a pair myself, since anything under 70 degrees is freezing cold. So then at around 10 o'clock, we headed out to the second big ass session of the event. Now, before writing the script, the only musician or band I remembered from this event was Phil Wickham. However, I actually went back and did some research, And by research, I mean an old Instagram post. Apparently, the band that played at this big-ass session was a band called Rush of Fools. I had never heard of them prior to this event, but that's who played. However, according to that post, me and the rest of the church actually got the front row seats. Yeah, that's a score. Of course, a bunch of other people got in front of us, but they all must have been really short because I was able to see over them. And in 8th grade, I was only like 5'5". So they must have been either 7th graders or they're all related to Muggsy Bogues. And then, of course, there was the speaker, and then we went out around 12 o'clock. So then at 12 o'clock, we ate lunch. Basically, the same thing like the night before. Afterwards, we split into 2 groups. So one group went to the mall and shopped, while the other went go-kart racing. I went with the group that went go-kart racing. This is when having thermal clothes really benefited me. Because it was really cold, like I once took my gloves off for like 2 minutes, and my hands were already turning blue. Surprisingly, my face never turned blue, as my face was so cold since it of course wasn't covered up like the rest of my body, but yeah, it was cold. We raced go-karts for about 3 hours, from 1 to 4, so you bet we were all freezing cold. Of course, the mall group got the advantage of having heat, so they weren't nearly as cold as we are. The actual portion of go-karting I don't really remember, although I want to think that there was once a case in which I ended up getting stuck on the railing and the dude operating the go-karts had to get me out. That was funny, but other than that, I don't quite remember much. I've been go-karting multiple times before, so I don't know if it was this particular time or another. So of course, after those 3 hours were up, we all gathered back with the mall people, and then we went back to the hotel and got ready for the third big-ass session. So we stayed at the hotel for maybe a little over an hour. At 5:30, we got fast food again. Then afterwards, we went off to big-ass session number 3. So this big-ass session lasted from 8 to 10. The band that played at this session was Switchfoot. So like Phil Wickham, I was pretty familiar with them, as I grew up listening to this band as well. Therefore, I was pretty hyped to see them live. But like Rush of Fools, I completely forgot about them until I looked back on my older Instagram posts. I don't think I even posted any pictures, but for some reason, right after reading the post about my church getting front seat at Big Ass Session 2, I instantly remembered Big Ass Session 3. Not sure how that worked. Anyways, this session was a little different than the other two because we were in a different conference center for whatever reason. I believe the conference center was in Pigeon Forge. Of course, the conference center where we went for Phil Wickham and Rush of Fools was in Gatlinburg. So the drive took a while, especially combined with all the traffic since traffic is absolutely abysmal in eastern Tennessee. So, ultimately, I really didn't enjoy myself at this concert like I thought. The reason is mainly because I was just tired, which makes sense. I had a long day, so I really didn't feel like going to this concert, but I did it anyway. I almost fell asleep when the speaker was giving out his message, although I do remember that a considerable amount of people actually gave their life to Christ. He asked if anyone made a decision to stand up, and maybe like 30 people did. I didn't make it on this trip though, but I would exactly 3 months later though, oddly enough. I've already explained that in Storytime 12 if you'd like to know more about that. And then finally, at 10 o'clock, Big Ass Session 3 is up. Time to go back to the hotel. So now, for some reason, I stopped being so tired while on the bus ride for whatever reason. So then when we got back to the hotel, me and my roommate decided to go for a swim. Although not instantly. We'd actually do it, as stated before, at 1 in the morning. Why? Well, why not? So we swam in the pool that night. I believe the pool also had a hot tub with it, as well as a waterfall. So it was pretty cool. Then around 2 o'clock, we dried off and headed back to our room and went to sleep. The fellow 8th grader didn't watch Star that night, so I didn't have to worry about waking up to a moan again. And then we woke up at 7:30. We had breakfast. After breakfast, we basically packed up everything and got our room straightened and loaded the bus. Then we headed on to our final big ass session. So, session 4, I believe it was from 10 to 12. This is another Rush of Fools concert at the same place that sessions 1 and 2 took place. So we were at least back at the same conference hall. After the session ended, we ate at this one restaurant. I don't remember too much about it. Like, I don't even remember what I ate here. All I remember is that it had some stone furnace and we as a church took our picture with it. And then at around 4:30, we finally arrived back home, back to normal life. Well, not school. So Tuesday and Wednesday were teacher work days, and then Thursday and Friday, we had to cancel school due to snow, but still a nice way to go about my long weekend. I also remember getting sick from this trip. Like, I believe that Tuesday, I was running at a 100-degree temperature. Of course, this was back in 2018. It was just a fever. But if this was like 2020 or 2021, oh god, I'd be scared. So yeah, that was Winter Retreat 2018. Overall, I had a blast. I of course don't remember much from this trip, as this was 3.5 years ago, and then of course this is the first time I've ever written about it, so I struggled a little bit to remember, but I still had a lot of fun on this trip. So that's all I got for today's story time. Next week, on August 20th, 2021, I'll be talking about taking standardized tests. Anyways, that's all I got, and I'll see you guys next week.